Following the landmark Supreme Court ruling on July 11, 2024, Nigerian states have been compelled to conduct local government elections to restore democratic governance at the local level. This ruling reaffirmed the autonomy of local government areas and put an end to governors dissolving democratically elected council officials. In addition, the ruling prohibited the common practice of state governors appointing caretaker committees to manage local councils. Federal allocations will also be withheld from councils administered by these communities. To comply with the federal government's October deadline, at least 11 states have already conducted local government elections. However, some states have scheduled their elections for later dates. Joining us now is a lawyer and former national president of the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, Malachy Ugwummadu, to discuss the conduct of council elections in some states in view of the Supreme Court judgment. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newsday.
Yes, I'm delighted to be here.
We're glad to have you. Now, of course, this court judgment was seen as a landmark decision. Can you provide a detailed analysis of how this judgment has been interpreted and implemented across various states?
Well, that's a tall one. But in terms of the judgment itself, it came across as a very healthy, development in the country, considering where we're coming from, particularly regarding the penchant of most state governments in abdicating their responsibility and refusing to ensure that the express provisions of Section 7 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, were complied with. What does that section say? It insists that local council government shall be democratically guaranteed. In other words, you do not have, there's no space for caretaker arrangement or for ad hoc programming, as the case may be. The Constitution insists that for governance at that tier of government, you must have a democratic election. What has happened prior to that landmark judgment was that state government took advantage of the, if you like, ambivalence in that section to erect administrative settings that suit their own convenience, and thereby appointing caretaker committees or whatever, and then run those tiers of government as though they were just an appendage of the state government. And what complicated that arrangement was that the funding of those local governments were in effect appropriated by the state, by what was known as the joint state and local government account. Until this judgment, it was a very, very fluid interpretation of what actually was the situation. Again, the state government took advantage of that and dictated what the local councils could do. So once they got the money, that money went into a joint account, jointly owned by the state and local councils. But as you know, once you have that kind of master-servant relationship, the master dictates what happens. In fact, I'm privy to the fact that I'm from Delta State. I'm aware that what they normally do is to allow those state governments to pay just salaries for teachers, and every other thing left is taken back by the state. And then they will determine what drainage will be done, what primary health centers will be refurbished, what up to summit, very mundane, minute, fundamental things that ought to be at the discretion of the local councils. So this is why Nigerians praised, but it's not just about praising the judgment or applauding the judgment that came. To what extent has this judgment been implemented? If you say 11 states, Please go on with your question.
I'm glad we're talking about implementation, because of course what we've now seen is the clamor for most states that have caretaker committees, or there's a sudden resurgence of everybody wanting to go for local government elections that we just saw. A number of them took place in different parts of the country, and you speak to various politicians and they're saying this is also everybody can meet the deadline to ensure that they have the right people in place so they can receive their budgetary allocations. What's your review of what transpired during some of the local government elections across Nigeria?
But let's start from the basis, so that it doesn't appear as if it has been fully complied with. So if you say 11 states out of 36, I'm not sure we're up to half of the states. So there's still a huge challenge. The fact that 11 states alone have conducted election presupposes that most states in the country were not running a democratically elected local government councils. That point needed to be cleared. Yeah. Now, coming to what has happened so far in terms of the compliance with this judgment and the character of the elections that took place in those, we take the last one, Rivers State. Rivers State, yeah. Became very, very, it was like the main picture. I was here, I was privileged to be here to, I think right on that day, yes, to discuss it. First is that we saw a very important dimension to election management in this country, one which we have always not just ignored, but thought was an impossibility. And that is regarding the role of the law enforcement agencies, particularly the Nigerian police force. You know, in Nigeria, it's usually a center of absurdity, and I'm sorry to say that. When you have policemen or traffic officers guarding traffic, sometimes the traffic becomes more complicated than when they are not there. And I like to liken that to, you know, there was no police involvement. Yet, this thing went seamlessly. Rivers State, look, I have led organizations that monitored election for decades. Rivers State is not just where you walk into and walk out. Contest in Rivers State is usually a do-or-die affair. And they leave you in no doubt that this is about life and death. In short, human beings used to be decapitated on election day, all in the name of election. Yet, our people came seamlessly, conducted this election within the bounds of civil behavior. Results were announced. So that threw up a very important, because we spent humongous amount of money, from logistics to sensitive materials to security. And you know, it's like what used to happen in the universities those days. When there are no means of security officers, they create a security situation. So is it possible that the law enforcement agencies have always hyped these security circumstances just so that there will be enough disbursement of this money, and then they justify what they are giving by way of allocation? I'm not trying to play down what the role of the Nigerian police is, or indeed every other law enforcement agency. But what happened in Rivers State threw up one very serious possibility that we are a people who can conduct ourselves, particularly when we are resolved to get it done. Secondly, do we really need, in most cases you hear 34,000 policemen, and if you go check the budget that goes into that operation, you will know why some of our roads are not being tarred when they ought to be, you know, constructed and tarred. So that is yet another question. Do we need to invest as much, or do we need to educate our people, get them to not just imbibe, but accept civil behavior as the irreducible minimum standard of behavior during elections? That is a possibility. That is what Rivers State showed. Then if you go to the politics of it, you would see what happened. I was here when I said that I did an article when Wike and Fubara started their forth and back. And the title was Wike, Fubara's best template for engagement. In other words, the Wike's strategy of engagement will profile the best template for Fubara to engage him. And that was precisely what happened. In short, I feel very vindicated. And I can explain that if you want me.
Well, maybe if we have any time left. But you have talked about the role the Nigerian police play in elections. Might need to review that, possibly. But I'd like for us to speak about the performance of the electoral body. Given our next performance in national elections, are you of the opinion that the Commission is capable of effectively managing local government elections, or do we need to see a systemic change of the body before that could happen?
Well, let's be clear on this point. Local government elections have never been conducted by the National Independent Electoral Commission. It has always been the State Independent Electoral Commission. So each state has its own electoral body. For which reason you have the resident electoral commissioners who superintend the affairs of those state election monitoring bodies. What we have seen, and this is without exception, is that ruling parties clear the day, the winner takes all situation, and in most cases, there isn't even one council taken by an opposition party. That points clearly to something. It's either the political parties are very popular and acceptable in those states, or it is huge interference of the ruling party in those exercises. I think we are safer if we accept the latter, just so that we remain vigilant, being the eternal price we have to continually pay for the liberty we seek. But here is the point. There have been complaints. In short, at that level of governance, you don't really speak of true elections. You actually talk safely about selections. And you need to just be close to either the contestants or the political actors to understand that what actually happens there is the endorsement of candidates by political godfathers, particularly at the local settings. And, make no fuss about it. If you think otherwise, you either get your fingers burnt or you regret standing out. Because at the end of the day, most results are even known before the election. And they will tell you clearly, that for me cannot be a fair contest. Okay. So, in other words, there are room for serious reform. Look, I have been invited by Yaga Africa. We were there last 2 weeks. It's a technical theme to review most of the cases of infractions, particularly those that have been tested through the crucibles of the law and turned out as judgments of court. And then, aggregate the elements of electoral malpractices with a view to identifying those hotspots and red flags that undermine the process. What we are doing with that is to be able to point out to the Nigerian people that, look, if we did nothing about this, we encourage the culture of impunity. Remember that under Section 145 of the Electoral Act 2022, it used to be 150 of the Electoral Act 2010, INEC has a responsibility, in short, power, to prosecute electoral offenses. But if I ask you now, how many convicted electoral offenders do you know? You'll scratch your head before you
So in light of that, what's the way forward? Because, you know, we're seeing the rubber stamp nature of having the state electoral commissions. INEC itself is a body that we're all studying closely and trying to understand how INEC can get it right. There's a bill before the Senate to establish the National Independent Local Government Electoral Commission. Is that the way forward, to create a new electoral commission that focuses on local governments? Or what do we do? A mixture of what's there already? How do we move forward?
I have a few ideas that could address this. First is civic education. That civic education envisages the proper role of political parties towards elections. And that ought to be the main responsibilities of political parties. I doubt whether we have all of those effectively going on in our political parties now. And by civic engagement, we are talking about properly educating our people about their roles, about the election itself, and the process of assessing political power being the main objective of political parties, as distinct from pressure groups or other associations. That is one. No time to elaborate more on that. The second is to tweak our electoral laws. I don't agree that we should have local government independent electoral distinct from state independent. No. That would be duplicating responsibility. In short, the ones we have, we've not properly managed them. Exactly. It's almost like saying create more universities when ASU is insisting that you are poorly managing the ones you have. Here is the point. If we stick to the laws, even as presently constituted, I've just talked about prosecution of electoral offenders. If you are able to demonstrate that the state has not just the resentment, but the capacity to deal with electoral offenders through prosecution, not persecution, and secure convictions and sentencing, that will serve as deterrent. You remember my friend Mike Ugwummadu? Mike Ugwummadu was an resident electoral commissioner in Akwa Ibom State. He had the guts, the virus, the will, the determination, if you like, the zeal and zest to take on a professor who, clearly infringed on the law. And he thought it was a joke until he was brought into the dock, convictions was obtained, and he was sentenced. Now, one out of the so many cases we have, including those who could not remember the figures they wrote on result sheets. So we are saying that INEC can do what they have always wanted to do. INEC has always had an excuse. That excuse is that they are not as resourced in terms of manpower as they ought to be able to prosecute electoral offenses in addition to the very humongous assignments that they bear. An MBA had offered to say, well, if that is a challenge, look no further. It is MBA that has the technical expertise to fill in the gaps, and we are ready to do this pro bono. In fact, about 7 years ago, I was written by MBA, yes? I was written by MBA. I wasn't in the meeting, but it was after their NEC meeting.
Well, you might need to tell us about that subsequently, but you have done justice to this with this time, and we'd like to appreciate you for your insight as always. Malachy Ugwummadu, former national president of CDHR, it's been a delight having you here on Newsday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.